Hello, everyone, and a huge welcome back to the PDHPE and CAFS podcast. You're with me, Kelly Bell, and it's my absolute pleasure today to welcome such a renowned educator. If you haven't heard of Jay before, not sure where you've been living, but Jay McTighe is a complete legend in education. He has written some of the most phenomenal books that have shaped education across the globe. And I feel very blessed to have you on the podcast today, Jay.
Glad to be with you, Kelly.
Thank you. Look, for those of our teachers in New South Wales who have never heard of you before, can you give us a bit of a rundown as to who you are, what you're about, and yeah, kind of, I suppose, a bit about yourself?
Well, I've been in education for 53 and a half years, believe it or not. Started as a teacher, of course. I worked in various roles uh, at the school level, district level, state ed level, and then wrote a book called Understanding by Design mid-career with Grant Wiggins. And that caused my career path to shift from working in public education for half my career to now writing and consulting for the last 25 plus years.
Wow. Jay, when you and Grant wrote that, and Grant's no longer with us, did you expect for it to have this ripple effect across education?
We did not. I had a full-time job working at the time in state ed on some education reforms, particularly to try to change the nature of high stakes accountability testing, at least in my home state of Maryland, from tests that were mostly selected response, multiple choice, to performance-based assessments that would engage students in applying their learning in more authentic contexts. And one of the goals of that change of assessment was to drive more authentic, relevant teaching and learning. I met Grant Wiggins in conjunction with my work with assessment because he was similarly an advocate for authentic, quote, authentic performance-based assessment. So we met in that context. A friend of ours who worked with ASCD, an international professional education association, saw our respective work on assessment and asked Grant and I to write a book for ASCD, thinking it would be about assessment. But my interest in assessment was driven more by my interest in good teaching and learning and knowing that assessment was impacting teaching and learning. You know, like the tail was wagging the dog in many cases. I wanted to work on the tail. And Grant had fairly recently finished his PhD at Harvard, and his focus was on curriculum design. So when we met to talk about the prospect of co-writing a book, I said, I'm happy to include areas of the book on assessment, but I don't want it to be an assessment book. I'm interested in teaching and learning, the instructional facet of our profession. And Grant said, and my work in Harvard was on curriculum design. And so Understanding by Design was literally born at a breakfast meeting where we were talking about both of our interests coming together. But that's a long answer to your question. The short answer is we wrote the book. Neither of us teach at university level, so we weren't in a publish or perish mode. We just thought we had some ideas that were worth sharing and had no idea or expectation that anyone would even read the book, much less that it would gain interest and appeal. But it has, and it's, you know, knock on wood or whatever one knocks on these days, it continues to have vibrant life. It's being used in schools and districts literally around the world.
And, you know, look, I say this a lot to some of our teachers, like that's the work you're doing or have done that you have done is legacy building. Like you're shaping what educators do in their classroom every single day. And what excites me most about your work is that assessment is there. It's part of the role. We have to assess our kids. High stakes testing still exists everywhere. Look, in Australia, we still have our HSE, our VCE, BC, like all these, you know, end of schooling exams, but they're so driven by, just getting through the content to teach the test or to get to the test. And I think, I've had my background, it has been in that area around assessment, and I've been part of our high stakes testing, like the head marker in our HSC for one of our subjects. But that good teaching, I think, often gets lost in our schools because people are just so focused on that test,
Mhm.
forget there's actual like teaching and learning happening in the background.
Mhm.
Mm. I would love to kind of unpack a few things, like because our teachers feel so pressured to teach to the test, and kind of get through the content. How does understanding by design reframe what they do in their classrooms every day so they start to focus more on what's happening with the kids?
Well, let me start with the title. The title of UBD gets at its big ideas. The first part of the title is understanding. And the contention that Grant Wiggins and I had going back 27 years ago was that a modern education should ultimately be preparing students to transfer, to be able to take what they've learned and apply that learning effectively and appropriately to new things. Um, because if we know anything about the world today, things are changing rapidly. We have unexpected opportunities and challenges. And just having rote learning, being able to give back what was told you in the way it was told, is an insufficient preparation for a modern, ever-changing world. Interestingly, we had those thoughts when we first developed the concept of understanding by design, but I think the focus on understanding and transfer is even more important in today's world than it was back then. But think about it, you can't transfer something if you don't understand it, right? If all you have is rote learning, all you can do is give back what was told to you in the way it was told. So understanding supports transfer, and that's the first big idea, teach for understanding and transfer. And the second big idea is by design. Plan with the end in mind, the end being understanding and transfer, and then you plan backward for your teaching, for your ongoing assessments. Everything flows from your goals. So more pointedly to your question, it seems that too often, and I certainly see it in the States and in other nations with high stakes testing, in addition to Australia, it's almost as if people feel that the ultimate goal they're working toward is getting the test scores up. Now, I completely understand these are high stakes tests. Scores get reported in the press. I know in the US it influences real estate values for certain parts of the geography. So they're clearly high stakes. But to me, there are a couple of flaws in thinking that because we have high stakes tests, therefore we just have to fixate on them and teach toward them as if those are the only goals. The first flaw is they're not our only goals. And a close examination of standards or outcomes or national curriculum, whatever term is used, when you look carefully at the goals for the various disciplines, they talk about things like in mathematics, reasoning and problem solving, not just understanding math concepts and formulaic, algorithmic plug-in. Or in health and physical education, your world, I would expect that the standards are focusing on developing people who value lifelong learning and lifelong wellness and are committed to a healthy life. We could go through every discipline, and there are important long-term goals, often that are transfer-oriented. This is what we're preparing students for when they get out of school to navigate life and work. So those are the most important goals we should be working toward. So part one of my answer is we ought to keep the real end in mind, the most important learning goals that we've already declared in our outcomes standards, national curriculum, and we should be teaching toward them. Now, the second part, of course, is standardized accountability tests, high stakes tests, invariably assess only a fraction of the goals that are typically proclaimed. A simple example in English language arts, at least my experience in the US, English language arts consists of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Rarely is listening and speaking ever assessed on high stakes tests. And writing, if it is assessed, is often with a kind of an artificial prompt in a timed writing situation. And reading is often tests of specific skills upon which or by which inferences about comprehension are made. Tests don't ask students to read a real piece of literature and explain it, or a real piece of informational text. That's a long way of saying the tests themselves are imperfect. They are what they are for reasons we know. They're testing large numbers of students. It has to be manageable, and scoring has to be affordable, and you have to get results back quickly. But to pretend that that's the whole ballgame for education is itself, a flawed perception.
Mm.
There's one other piece, though, that I want to mention, and I haven't done analysis of test scores in Australia, but I have in the US and Canada. And here's the other little secret, perhaps. I'll ask it as a question. What are the most widely missed items on standardized accountability tests in any subject? My experience and the data that shows, or that data of item analyses, the most widely missed items are not items of simple recall or recognition. They're items that, for instance, in mathematics, they're multi-step problems that require reasoning. There may be a selected response set of answers, but the problems aren't simple. In reading-oriented tests, the reading calls for interpretation, inference, not just literal, give back what you read. So that brings us to another point. What's the best test prep? If your main goal is practicing for state or national tests, don't fixate on the format, because what I see a lot of teachers doing is doing practice testing and mimicking the form of the standardized tests. But often their classroom tests are lower level than the items that are most widely missed. My answer to the question, how should we best prepare for high stakes tests, is teach for understanding and transfer, give kids lots of experience in applying their learning, asking them to explain their thinking. And of course, we're going to give kids some practice in the test format, but we're not going to fixate on the test, and we're not going to do test prep teaching. That is a disservice to students. And by the way, the data also shows that test prep fixation will not substantially raise test scores over time. You might get a bump the first year or two by familiarizing kids with the format, but that's not going to last. Final point on this long answer. There's another casualty that needs to be mentioned: student interest and engagement. My experience is kids don't wake up looking forward to doing practice tests, resource worksheets at school. They're interested in authentic work and projects and that which is inherently engaging. So that's a long answer, but it's an important question.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And look, you've just unpacked so much of what I feel like I've been kind of, singing from my soapbox about for such a long time, that we can't just teach the content. We have to get the kids to apply their understanding of the content through unique situations or experiences. And I know teachers ask me, because I was in the classroom for 16 years, and teachers say to me, how did your kids do so well? And we were at a school that we had a low SES area. We had a lot of migrants. Our kids couldn't speak English, and we we're trying to prepare them for this big exam at the end. And I said to them, I think it was the magic in the classroom, because I brought my classroom to life through real life experiences. And maybe in the first few years of teaching, I would do a lot of chalk and talk, get the textbook out, let's summarize the textbook and do the question just from the textbook. But once I realized I need my kids to apply what I've actually taught them and what they've learned, that's where the light bulbs for me started to go off. And obviously finding your work and formative assessment, PBL, inquiry-based learning, it all kind of just meshed into this really good mix of good teaching practice. And I think for a lot of the teachers who are new to talking to me, they're like, Kel, why didn't I learn this 20 years ago? Why didn't someone teach me at university 15 years ago? And these guys are like, so far into their career. And I think that disservice that we're doing for the kids. Learning isn't meant to be just preparing for that test. And I think that transfer is really important. One thing I do say to our teachers, and it kind of came from your work around those misunderstandings, was I've done quite a few masterclasses in our memberships on these are the common mistakes I see our kids make over the last 16 years. These are the common misunderstandings or misconceptions. Let's now think about those. If they're continuing to make these mistakes, obviously, like for us as the educator, maybe that's a gap in our knowledge, application, and skill with that content. Yeah, look, there's so much gold like in backwards mapping. So we are in a really big, probably the biggest curriculum reform in our state ever. Teachers are, they're trying to get their head around all this new syllabus content. Where would you suggest teachers kind of start with backwards mapping or think like I know Stephen Covey's quote, begin with the end in mind. I always say that
Sure.
to our teachers, like that kind of really resonates with them. If they were kind of looking at all these changes ahead and going, how do we even start with backwards mapping? What would you kind of suggest as a way to kind of move forward for them?
Well, I'm going to bracket my answer in two tracks, if you will.
Yeah.
The first is a direct answer to your question about how should teachers prepare. But if time permits, I'd like to address a second track, which is more systemic. How should we think about this at the school level or even across a state like New South Wales? So from the teacher level, to me, the first question should be, what do you want your students to be able to do with what you are teaching them in the long run? Think about authentic performance, where they're going to be actually doing meaningful things with what your subject area is and your grade level. So to me, I call that your transfer goals. You can do that as an individual teacher. I think it's more impactful if you had a team of teachers teaching the same grade or a course to agree. Let's agree on those long-term goals. And by the way, interestingly, it's often in the opening pages of standards or curriculum documents where those kinds of goals are laid out. However, many teachers don't read the opening pages. They go right to the grade level standards or the benchmarks, and that's where all the content is. And you can get lost in the weeds without realizing why we're teaching all the particulars. They're these larger ends. So to me, starting with the end means think about what you want students to be able to do with their learning, ideally transfer. Then ask yourself the question, what will students need to understand in order to transfer, to put together content and process in a transfer way? So identify understandings. As you noted a moment ago, teachers that have experience teaching content are able to predict not only what are the big ideas that are worth understanding, but where are the areas where kids sometimes struggle or even have misconceptions. So let's target those specifically. We call those the understanding section of UBD. And then continuing backward, what are the more discrete knowledge and skills needed for developing an understanding, enabling transfer? So essentially that's stage one of backward design. Second category of questions is in stage two. And we ask teachers to think about this early rather than later. What evidence will show that my students really understand and can apply their learning? So actually think about assessments early on. It's one thing to say, I want students to know this or do that. It's another to say, and what will I look for as evidence that they understand and can perform? So thinking about assessment evidence, and I'm an advocate for both performance-based assessments, which ask students to apply their learning and explain what they've done, and as a complement to more traditional tests and quizzes that might look more like a standardized exam. That's stage two. And then stage three is, how do we teach to get there? And we want to teach with the end in mind, not just cover content where it's laid out in a book or in a curriculum set of standards or benchmarks to cover, but thinking about the goals that we've identified in stage one and mindful of the assessments we're going to teach toward those ends. So that's backward design in a nutshell.
Mm.
Permit me to use an
Yeah,
analogy
yeah.
that will especially relate your audience will be able to relate to it, I think. Think about athletics and coaches. In team sports, coaches always have the end in mind, right? It's performance in a game. The game is an authentic performance. Every game is different, right? And the players have to adjust on the field, on the court, on the ice. The coaches know that our job is to teach and prepare the students we have for the game. We plan backward from the game and we think about knowledge. You can't play the game if you don't know the rules, got to know the knowledge. There are skills, both individual and team skills, and a lot of practices working on individual and team skills. But there's also understandings in gameplay, also known as game strategy. So the coach has the end in mind, authentic performance that involves transfer, plans backward with the players they have to build knowledge, skills, and understanding, always with the end in mind. Now, the two other subparts to the analogy. The first is no effective coach that I've ever seen would march through a bunch of drills and skill practices in practice. But the first time the team ever saw the actual game was on game day, right? Coaches wouldn't do that. Coaches not only are developing knowledge, skills, and understandings during practice, but they have at least once, if not many, formative assessments before the game. In the US, we call these scrimmages, right? A scrimmage is game-like practice or game-like conditions in practice. The difference is the coach can blow a whistle, stop the play, and say, no, you have to line up differently, or you're not anticipating this move by the opposition. So that's a long way of saying you don't just teach component knowledge, skills, and understandings for the game. You also have game-like practice, a formative assessment and feedback, which is preparation for the game.
Mm.
So the last part of the analogy, I have never heard a coach of a team sport say to me, Jay, I don't have time for those games. They take all afternoon. How could I ever cover my playbook? Right? But think about it. You hear teachers saying, oh, that project takes too long, or that performance task, they're not testing us that way. I have to cover my playbook. With all due respect, my recommendation is teachers think like a coach. Think about the authentic performances you're preparing for that the standards call for. That's what you should be teaching. And yes, you're going to cover content in the sense of developing knowledge that's needed and skills that are needed. But your goal is not covering a playbook of isolated skills and facts. Your goal is preparing for authentic performance.
Mm. Jay, like you, this is all stuff that just like it seems so simple, doesn't it? Like to me, because I've, read your work, I've been practicing it for so long. But to hear you say that out loud, and to the teachers who are listening to our podcast and have heard me talk about this stuff for so long, it just kind of, so many like things that are going off for me. Like I always say to our teachers, because we're PE, I say like you're like the coach in your classroom. You need to develop your learning experiences so the kids get to feel and get to see what it's like on game day. And I say the HSC, the end game, our HSC. So you're preparing them, as you go along, showing them the strategies, showing them little tips and tricks that they can implement like right now in different contexts, with different experiences, with the common mistakes and common misconceptions to prepare the kids for the end game. And then I say the kids are like the team. If they don't work together, because, in our HSC, our averages, you get a higher average, less spread of marks, greater opportunity for, your marks to be high anyway. So the kids essentially affect the performance of their cohort. So I say to the teachers, you have to, build those relationships with your kids, like the players, like the actual team, so they can then work together for the team in the HSC. And I still think, hand on heart, so many HSC teachers are sitting there doing a Google slide, just getting through the content, just go, teaching to the test, but not preparing the kids for that end game. And I know there's the pressure. I know, like you said, the high stakes testing, the media, real estate, kids, selective schools, like all those things kind of become part of it. But I think we also need to think about the end game's not the HSE. The end game is
That's right.
life. Like it is life. And for PE, and I've been sharing this a lot lately with our teachers because of the curriculum reforms, that we need to prepare our kids for life. Our course is one of the only courses that pretty much everything we do, our kids will touch on it again in their life. Self-esteem,
Hmm.
resilience, critical, like health literacy, all of it. Like that's how we live, wellness.
Absolutely. And those are the big ideas and the important authentic goals that should drive a program. And the HCC is on the side in my view.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's a misconception to for people who think that because there's high stakes exams, we have to plan backward from those and do a lot of test prep and content coverage. And there's another set of data that I think is often less examined, if at all, and that is surveys of students, interviews with students. Ask students what's most engaging to them in a class or a course or a program, and listen to their answers. When are they most engaged in school? When are they putting forth effort? Where do they see worthwhile learning that's worth the effort to learn versus just trying to, play the game to get marks?
Yeah.
And they'll tell you the qualities are working toward authentic, worthwhile purposes, often authentic in nature, often where the kids have some choice, often when they get to work in groups, often when there's a real product and an audience, ideally. Those are the things, good project-based learning, as you noted,
Mm.
are the things that engage students.
Yeah.
And they don't, in my experience, end up asking, does this count? How many points do I get? Driven by that minimum compliance grade or marking motivation, which is not motivating in my view. And we want our teaching and learning experiences to engage students in active, meaning-making ways. And we know the things that do that.
Yeah, look, again, so many light bulbs because our teachers in our curriculum reform, in one of our big, we probably have like, I think about 16 to 17,000 students do one particular course. So it's called Health and Movement Science now. And the kids, and this is scaring health and movement science teachers, that they have to do a collaborative investigation.
Hmm.
And I've been saying to them, like, you'll be okay. We've been doing it in another course, like a sister course, I suppose, like learn from that. A lot of teachers know me from that sister course. But in its essence, it's PBL. Like we're developing those critical thinking skills. The kids are going to have, focus questions / a driving question. They're going to have to present to an authentic audience
Mm-hmm.
like we would in the real world if we were working in a team of, collaborators or entrepreneurs or doctors or nurses or
Mm-hmm.
researchers working together to show people, hey, this is what we've been working on. And I think because it's new to those teachers, essentially, like they're a bit scared about that because they're like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure what this is going to look like. Is it going to be chaos in my classroom? I'm like, no, you need to have structure. There are steps that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
And our education authority have kind of provided some of those steps, and our teachers in our memberships have access to resources that we've developed. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just that like that fear of, okay, this is new, this is going to look a bit different to what I'm used to. But it's exciting for the kids. There are marks associated with this one though. It has to be assessed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's marks for collaboration. There's also marks for, what they've learned and what they've, that application. Joe, can I ask a question around like if I was to come into like an ideal classroom, maybe your classroom, when you were in the classroom, what would transfer look like in your classroom? What would some learning experiences look like that you might have set up in your class?
Well, it would partly be influenced by if I were teaching a particular subject and or in the lower grades where one teacher teaches multiple subjects. but as a general descriptor, kids would be working toward known tasks or projects where the criteria, the success criteria or rubric would also be known early on, ideally coupled with models or examples of work from previous year students with the names removed, so that students would know I'll call it the performance goal, what they're working toward, what success looks like, not only in terms of a written rubric, which some kids don't understand the language in a rubric necessarily, but coupled with examples of excellent, good, fair work, and that those samples are used in conjunction with teaching and learning. So let me think out loud with just a quick example. I might venture into a health example too, but another example would be at the end of this unit, maybe it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, each of you is going to pick an issue that's of interest to you, and maybe there's a list of 3 or 4 that are given to the kids, or there's some choice. A contemporary issue. You're going to research and get information about the issue, come up with your position on the issue, and then your goal is to communicate and try to convince others of your position. And as part of your convincing, you need to cite reasons, evidence, and anticipate and try to rebut objections. So that would be an example of an authentic task. Now, the skills are, I think, evident. There's research, critical thinking, argumentation. Now, I might give kids choice about whether it could be how they produce a product. It might be written, it might be a podcast, it might be an infographic with verbal support. I might give them some choice of product. That's a variable. But we would plan backward from that so that my lessons would be building the skills of research, argumentation, critical analysis, argumentation, and then communication. Ideally, there would be an audience for when they have to present their position and their issue. Potentially, it could be in a debate format also. And that if anyone came in during, let's say it's a 6-week unit, anyone came in during the 6 weeks, I would hope that the student would be able to answer questions like, what are you working on today? Why are you doing it? What are you preparing for? How will you know if you're successful at what's ahead? I would want them to be able to answer those questions.
And so what role do you think explicit teaching still has within that framework of your transfer lesson?
In the same way that explicit teaching is a part of good coaching, right? Even with advanced players, even pro players still work on fundamentals. There's videotape, there's analysis. They have shooting coaches in basketball and so on. So there's a place for direct instruction, especially with younger children who maybe have never seen a skill in action, or how do I do this, or don't understand a conceptual idea and the teacher needs to explain it very almost didactically. There's nothing wrong with that. I've actually proposed that we can think about, categorically speaking, 3 interrelated but not identical roles for teachers in a understanding based by design based classroom or system. There's a place for direct instruction and modeling. Unquestionably, teachers are experts. Kids don't know everything automatically. And there's a role for us in that case. There's a second role of what I call facilitative teaching, which is more Socratic questioning, putting out problems or challenges, giving the kids some hints, but not telling them what to do, facilitating their, what I call meaning making. And thirdly, there is coaching. And the coaching role is largely giving feedback as the students are trying to get better at performing something of value. So that's a long way of saying there's no one best teaching method. our teaching methods are based on our goals, the nature of the students we have, and what they need to get better.
Mm. And I think once we kind of have all those little things in our toolkit, it then creates that really rich learning experience for the kids. They're actually excited to come to class. They're able to transfer their understanding and their application through that rich learning experience. And I think what I've certainly been advocating, and obviously it's based on your work, based on Dave Williams, teach like a pirate, Dave Burgess, teach like a pirate, Dylan Williams, like formative assessment, it kind of then shapes this really awesome lesson, and their kids just are so excited to come to and experience. They forget they're actually learning and they're at school. But I think, for a lot of us who are, senior teachers, that looming HSC sometimes is the dampener to all of that. But I really encourage our teachers, like you can obviously hear still how passionate you are, Jay, about education. Like you love education, and that just through your explanations, I love your analogies with coaching and basketball, and our teachers will definitely connect with that. What do you hope to see happening in schools across the globe? Like, what's your big
Well,
vision?
again, I would ideally love to see that schools and the overarching institutions like state education departments or national education departments would articulate what I've described as a set of long-term transfer goals. By long-term, I mean, what do we want to see in a graduate? What do we hope they'll be able to do with their learning when they're navigating life and work and encountering new opportunities and challenges, which is the world today's students will inherit? That having an explicit set of such goals provides a North Star that we're all collectively working toward. Then I've argued that we're at a point where we can rethink our conception of curriculum mapping. I don't know about Australia per se, because I haven't been there for a while, but I can tell you in North America, curriculum mapping typically manifests itself as just listing a set of content topics or skills laid out on a calendar map. This is what we're going to cover.
Mm.
And I'm suggesting that we shift to, not that we don't need a scope and sequence of content, I think we do, but highlighting more than just covering a bunch of content, literally putting into maps the performance tasks and projects that would show what kids could do with their learning. So imagine a set literally from, let's say, end of 12th grade in the US, all the way down to pre-kindergarten level, that we could see maps of performance tasks and projects. Some would be subject specific. Some, if not many, would be interdisciplinary, because we know that in the real world, problems and challenges don't fall neatly into subject silos. They spill over. And that a new teacher coming into a school, the question would be not what content do I teach? The question would be, what are you helping prepare our students for? Are you coming in at grade 5? You need to see what happens below grade 5, what happens ahead of you, and take a look at the performances that we want our kids to do. So that the teacher comes in recognizing that their job is a performance-based teacher and coach, as opposed to a content cover or just covering a bunch of content and hope it sticks. I would love to see that as the norm.
And look, I know that certainly in here in Australia, we have an Australian curriculum, but there are some states, New South Wales being one, Western Australia being another one, that have gone, no, we're going to do our own thing, like we're going to do our own curriculum. And I think that just creates, I don't know, more work for everyone, and imagine if we were all working towards the same thing, the same goals. It doesn't matter what state you're in, you're kind of all working to that same either goals or skills, or that vision, for their future. Look, teachers who are listening to us, we inside what we're doing for our PDHPE courses, because our kindergarten, our primary school, so K to 6 is changing, our 7 to 10 is changing, and our year 11 courses have just changed. We are providing that in our memberships where teachers will see what our primary kids are doing, the progression, and then our high school kids, because I think on the high school side, we never saw what they were doing in primary school. We just then
Right.
kind of entered year 7. Okay, well, they don't know how to write this, they don't know how to do this, or we need to kind of fill that gap, or okay, they're actually, quite ahead for that fundamental movement skill. So teachers in our memberships, you guys will see that in the membership, how that progression goes from kindergarten to year 10, and what we can kind of do to kind of help each other in those respects. And even in primary school, what they're kind of will expect in a high school setting. Jay, I do have one final question for you. Like, I could seriously sit here all day with you, but
Mhm.
I know that you're not going to do that. Um, if you had some advice for a young teacher who, or even a teacher who hasn't heard about understanding by design, where would you kind of suggest that they start to kind of, they're busy, but how would they kind of get their head around a bit more about understanding by design?
I will just, among other things, I'll send you a couple of articles, including an article that just describes an overview of understanding by design, UBD. Um, and then my advice for someone who thinks that the understanding by design framework has merit, but particularly if they're a beginning teacher, my advice is think big, start small, work smart, and go for early wins. So what does that mean? Think big. If you like the ideas that are in the UBD framework, think about and maybe set a goal that in 3 or 4 years, everything I teach, I want to organize in this framework. But don't expect that you're going to be able to do it immediately, particularly for a beginning teacher. They just got to understand and learn about the day-to-day of schooling, and there's so much to take in first year. But so think big, start small. Pick one unit that you like, that maybe and try to build a unit using the UBD elements. Think about transfer, think about associated understandings, think about a performance task or project that will show evidence of those things, and teach like a coach. If possible, find a colleague, especially an experienced colleague, who might work with you on building out a unit.
Mm.
If you can, maybe pick one, you develop one unit first half of the year, one unit second half of the year. In doing so, you'll learn a lot about UBD and about teaching and assessment. Then the second year, you could say, maybe I'll do 2 units first semester, 2 second semester. Work Smart has several components. One, of course, is find a mentor teacher or another teacher to work with. It's fun and interesting to me to co-develop units using UBD. But now we have AI, and AI tools can be extraordinary helpers. We don't want to completely turn over all of our thinking to an AI, but particularly for a beginning teacher, they can get great ideas for transfer, for understandings needed by transfer, for essential questions that can stimulate student thinking, for authentic tasks tied to standards and our goals. So work smart in that way. By the way, I have grandchildren now, and I've thought about this. Would I want my 7 or 9-year-old grandchild with a first-year teacher who was just struggling to try to understand the kids and the content and all the particulars of school, left to create his or her own lesson plans, or have that teacher get some really good unit and lesson ideas from AI? I want the latter.
Mm. Yeah, look, it's funny that you bring up AI. We just had 2 episodes last week and the week before with Holly Clark. So I did 2 like little sessions with Holly, and we spoke a lot about AI. And my big thing is that with it is that it amplifies what we do. It cuts back on a lot of that preparation. It gives us just a different, I suppose, a different lens, or, I think Holly calls it like a thought partner. It kind of gives
Yeah.
us someone to bounce ideas off with. Like, you don't have to do it alone. You're not in it alone. We are all in this together, and that's something that I've been preaching in our memberships. That when we approach this new curriculum that we're about to tackle in New South Wales, we have, Jay's framework of understanding by design embedded into our units of work, in our programs, like thinking about that big picture. What are we actually preparing the kids for? But, how we can kind of prepare our teachers and make them or help them work smarter, because I know for my first year of teaching, my first few years of teaching, I struggled. You're just getting your head around schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So again, my mantra is think big, start small, work smart, and go for early wins. Pick something that you love to teach because it will come through. Don't pick your least favorite topic, at least as a starting point. But the good news is understanding by design is fundamentally a way of thinking, a way of prioritizing and focusing teaching, a way of ensuring that we have evidence for the things we value. It's not about filling in boxes in a template, which some teachers, when it's mandated, might conclude.
Yeah. So, Jay, my very last question, I promise that this will be the last one. If you were to give yourself, your younger teacher self, some advice, what would it be?
Many of the things I just answered to your previous question would probably be my answer to your last question. I will say that even as a beginning teacher, I think I had good instincts. I was trying to do the things that I advocate now. I just didn't know how to do them well. And I didn't have the experience, both the content experience and or the pedagogical experience to know quite how to bring them off. But even in my early days, I had the right intentions and even some successes, albeit in a primitive sort of way. So I think I would say to my younger self, trust your instinct, just learn more about those instincts and you'll be a better teacher.
Beautiful, nice. Now, if teachers want to learn more about understanding by design, apart from the 2 articles, you have your book about understanding by design. Great book, great read. Mine's a little bit battered and
Oh, that's the best thing for an author to see.
Yeah, well read. Where can teachers connect with you outside of that?
May I share my screen very quickly?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If that's possible.
Yeah.
No.
I'll just give you. Did that work?
Yeah, that did. So give me 1 second.
All right.
I'm going to answer verbally, but as I'm pulling this up,
Beautiful.
my website is just my name, jmctighe.com, C-O-M. So give me 1 second. So right now it's on the screen. I think you can, are you able to see? Oops.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I'm just going to walk through very quickly, but I'll send you a link to this. I'm also going to send you some articles that you can post or share any way you wish.
Thanks, Jay.
But this is the home page. And if one were to scroll to resources, this first image is a summary of the most current resources on understanding by design. There are literally all of my recent books are there. There are a number of articles and blog posts that are all free. So people can just go online, and I'll send you some of these, but you could get them on your own. There are podcasts, and I need to update this, and maybe I'll add, if you allow me, I'll add yours when it comes out.
Yeah, thank you.
So these are all ways of accessing information, but then one more piece before we conclude. Let's see. Pardon me 1 second. Back under resources, you scroll down, there are websites. This, for instance, is a 43-page hot link set of resources for understanding by design with some general websites, and then by alphabetically department or discipline based. So here are examples in health and physical education.
Excellent.
English language arts, library, media, mathematics, etc.
So good.
And I could go on and on, but you could
Yeah.
navigate down. Here are, for example, sets of essential questions for various subject areas. So health and PE are some examples of understandings and essential questions. So trust me, Kelly, there are innumerable resources, many free, and my website is kind of a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
Finally, if people want to reach me, my email address should be listed here, and I'll send it to you as well.
Thank
And I
you.
always happy to chat with people.
Thank you. Jay, look, like I said, I could be here all day listening to you talk. I love like the understanding by design completely changed how I taught, how I read professional learning, how I now help our teachers embed these frameworks and these ideas into their teaching. And that has a massive impact. You know, we have lots and lots of teachers in our membership. So look, I feel very blessed that you have spent so much of your time. I know it's your evening, our morning. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for what you're doing and what you will continue to do and what you know, the legacy that you have built in education. A huge thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words, and it's a pleasure working with educators like yourself. It's what gives me joy, and happy to be a part.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you.
Okay, I have one quick thought as you were talking. I don't know if the
Yeah.
thing is recording, but when you were talking about projects, that
Yeah.
they're calling for projects. So I was thinking about, so what are transfer goals for health, physical education? Well, lifelong fitness and wellness is one, right? So I'm 75, just finished this weekend playing in a senior Olympics pickleball tournament.
Oh, wow.
And last year I qualified for senior nationals in my age group. But what I was thinking as you were talking about project,
Yeah.
because I was around, it was for 50 to 90-year-olds in 5-year increments. So I'm around 500 people, a few younger than me, a few older than me, healthy, active, in a sport, in good shape, vibrant. And I'm thinking, it'd be cool if kids would come to something like this and interview and ask them about your life and what does health mean to you and what does a healthy lifestyle mean? Because these are people that are doing it.
Mhm.
That would be a cool project, I think.
Yeah. And look, in our health and movement science syllabus, we talk about healthy aging, you know, because it's, you know, pandemic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, and look, the kids have to do this in year 11. Part of their actual curriculum, like a mandated curriculum, they have to do a
Uh,
collaborative investigation. So
that's
look,
what I was thinking.
great
That would
idea.
be,
Like that's a really good idea. And I love that you're still active. My dad is 70 next year and he actually represented our like area and he
mhm.
managed to be he got a gold medal for the I don't know what he was doing, something for the surf life saving.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, he's like the Australian champion. So
Hmm.
he's very excited about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. But
But
it gives kids a model of
yeah,
what we talk about, lifelong fitness and wellness. But here are people living it, and they can see joy, they can see health, and so
yeah, yeah.
uh,
This is the end goal. Like you're the end goal.
well, maybe.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, Jay. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to send you some articles that you're welcome to share with your
Okay.
any way you wish.
Okay.
And
Thanks
you
so
send
much.
me the podcast link when it's done.
Okay.
If it's okay with you, I'll post it with my other ones.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. I honestly, like I said, I do appreciate your time and so generous. Thanks, Jay.
My pleasure. Good
Thank
luck to you,
you.
Kelly.
Thank you. See ya. Bye-bye.